I'm gonna watch a video by David Harvey. Apparently, it's about neoliberalism and how it's causing the main problems we have in society. So, we'll see how this goes. We'll turn the volume up, and hopefully, we can we can learn more about neoliberalism. So, let's see. It was a recommendation by one of my friends, and he said to watch it because it explains the problems with neoliberalism and the problems we have in our modern time. I don't think that neoliberalism is as heavy as a problem as people think, and the problems that you're explaining neoliberalism is the source of can be explained by other factors. So that's pretty much what I'm trying to argue. But let's see what David Harvey, the preeminent scholar of neoliberalism, says. If he gives dog shit arguments, I'm going to be really pissed.
It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert, joining you from New York City,
Real News
where I'm
Network.
at the 2019 Left Forum, which is actually taking place in Brooklyn.
Left Forum? Okay, we'll continue. Interesting.
This year. And I'm joined by David Harvey, Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the Graduate Center
Okay, so first of all, this guy is a professor of anthropology. What does an anthropologist have to say about neoliberalism? Isn't anthropology the study of human? It's first of all, it's the study of human. What is it called? Human history. It's like the study of trying to figure out the sources of ancient things in the past. Like, for example, an ice age. How did humans survive the ice age? Or it's the study of human beings in history. It's the equivalent of why I have a problem with him being a preeminent scholar of neoliberalism is simply because an anthropologist doesn't study economics. And if you have no experience in economics, you can't judge the issue of neoliberalism. I feel like this is just going to be some BS, but I'll watch anyways. Let's continue.
the City University of New York. Thanks so much, David, for joining us today. So I want to start with the question of neoliberalism, because that's an issue that has been a lot on people's minds here at the Left Forum, it seems to me. And one of the issues regarding
again, this is the Left Forum, so I assume this is a politically charged topic. So he has an opinion, definitely. So it's not like he's coming from this through a neutral source, and he's developing these sources based off of where the facts lead.
liberalism. It seems to be the strange contradiction between, on the one hand, that everybody's saying, and I think the kind of the progressive candidates on the Democratic Party in the United States are kind of bearing this out, the loss of legitimacy of neoliberalism at this point, at least as an ideology, as a mode of thinking. But on the other hand, and this is kind of this contradiction, is the persistence of neoliberalism in its institutionalized form.
Okay, so you're saying that neoliberalism is still persists. When was this dated? 6 years ago. When was that? 2019. So this was the beginning of the first Trump administration. He assumes that neoliberalism. So the guy who's arguing with me is saying that neoliberalism is still an operative function on how the world works. But 2019 was the beginning of the end. We went through industrial policy and we had certain facts about the way society was going. We were essentially, neoliberalism is fundamentally dead only because we have moved through a transition phase where capitalism is serving the state rather than the state serve capitalism. So again, if he gives an argument saying that neoliberalism still persists even with the beginning of the Trump administration in 2019, then obviously he probably hasn't seen the next couple of years. So I assume that this information is out of date, because as of 2026, neoliberalism is dead as a doornail. The only people who defend neoliberalism are people who are either Europeans or neoliberalism as an institution is dead, mainly because the functions of government is to control and constrain capitalism through the state and have it serve the state's purposes.
All kinds of structures in place, from the World Bank to the World Trade Organization, the European Union, the new and revamped North American Free Trade Agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's all kinds of different institutions in place.
Okay, all these things are showing that, we left the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We renegotiated Canada, or the NAFTA, into a newly revamped trade agreement that allows for Trump to institute tariffs at whatever rate he wants. It also creates a situation where there are no free trade agreements that the U.S. is following completely. Free trade is dead because the U.S. used to carry free trade on its back and now is shunting it in favor of higher taxes, higher barriers to trade through tariffs, and through the state controlling capitalism. So if this guy, David Harvey, gives an argument that this is not the case, then I know he's full of shit.
That basically institutionalized neoliberalism. And so my question is, how can we get beyond this contradiction, in the sense that, what good does it do if neoliberalism has been vanquished on the level of ideas, but it continues on, kind of, as some have said, perhaps in a zombie-like form, without any real life, but as individual nations, it's almost too difficult to do anything about it, even if a progressive government comes into office. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a zombie form. I think it's very active, and for some of the reasons.
Okay, so he thinks it's still active. All right, what are his reasons? This better be good. Because if he gives some bullshit reasons, and he's an anthropologist, not an economist, so he probably doesn't know what he's talking about.
Instantiated within many of the institutions, and you mentioned that we have a global thing with the WTO, which is a neoliberal construct to which everybody...
Bro, the WTO is irrelevant. The US can ignore it. China can ignore it. The EU can ignore it. Just because these institutions exist does not mean that neoliberalism is the operating word of the day. It's entirely the international system is dependent on power, and power is exercised by states having the resources to control and constrain their societies, their enemies, and react in a Darwinian way to control society and control the way the world is functioned. So I'm gonna give this guy a chance, but I'll have to keep an open mind.
Is supposed to comply. You have a European Union with Maastricht Accord and Lisbon Accords, which are completely kind of neoliberal in their orientation.
Okay, he's saying the EU is neoliberal, mainly because it tries... So, saying the Treaty of Lisbon and then, these treaties... He probably doesn't even know what those treaties mean. First of all, the Treaty of Lisbon is an intelligence sharing agreement. The EU as a project is decidedly in place because of the post-war institutions after 1945 to constrain and prevent another European war. It's fundamentally because we don't want a World War III from happening. It has nothing to do with neoliberalism. So I don't know what this guy is talking about, but we'll continue.
Even further than that, I think we have a mindset in which, in a curious kind of way, we have all become neoliberals without knowing it. And even when we kind of object to some of the more egregious activities which are going on, we often look at alternatives in a very neoliberal kind of way. And I think one of the questions I wanted to run up,
Example being?
ask around here of my colleagues is to what degree has the left become neoliberalized? I mean, everybody's critical of Clinton and Blair and so on for neoliberalizing the Democratic Party and the Labour parties, but I think it's gone much deeper than that. So it's not gone. And I would point out that if one of the themes of neoliberalism is to deregulate, Trump has deregulated at a rate which is absolutely phenomenal. So that is very...
Neoliberalism equals deregulation. Okay, I guess I get what he's... What is he defining neoliberalism as? That's the fundamental question. He doesn't define it in this video. He doesn't give an argument that it still exists. It's just this nebulous bad thing, according to this guy. Absolute nonsense.
Very consistent with a neoliberal project and a deepening of the neoliberal project as opposed to its...
What is the neoliberal project?
Back. The tax bill he gave out was a classic neoliberal document, which was really a bondholders' charter. And I think that actually, in many day-to-day aspects, neoliberalism is alive and active.
Our tax policy is neoliberal. If our tax policy was neoliberal, then there would be no taxes on consumption. The TCJA would have not taxed any consumption. They would not do a sales tax, and income taxes would be fine because neoliberalism doesn't depend on that. It would focus on reducing barriers to trade and focus on expanding the ability of people to purchase and sell goods in the market. He gives no operative definition of neoliberalism in this video so far, and there's very little background. But the TCJA was definitely not a neoliberal bill.
I think that the problem, however, is, as you mentioned, its legitimacy. And I think what's happening is there's a curious alliance occurring between right-wing authoritarianism and neoliberalism, which is very, very troubling. And
this alliance being? Explain.
I think that is a very dangerous sign.
I want to return to that point, but before I do, I want to touch on something that you said just before that, which is about how the left might have incorporated some key ideas of neoliberalism. And this is, of course, some...
Okay, I agree with this part. The Democrats currently turned into the establishment party, and the establishment party defends established institutions, conventions, and way of doing things. The Democrats didn't always used to be this way, but I think because of the Clinton years, they've become more fundamentally institutional and defendant of the main institutions. Now, does that mean they're neoliberal? We'll have to see what the next president does, but Biden was not neoliberal. He was neoliberal during the Obama years, but he focused on industrial policy. He focused on the state controlling capitalism, preventing monopolies, trust busting. He was this progressive candidate that focused on reducing the influence of corporations and weakening companies at the expense of economics, but benefiting the state. So I'm not sure what he means by the Democrats becoming the party of neoliberalism, but that does not make sense to me. The Democrats are an establishment party. Perhaps there's some holdovers of neoliberalism, but as of now, neoliberalism is as dead as a doornail in the year of our Lord 2026.
Something that has only been discovered recently, I would say, well, not that recently, in the last 10 years. Neoliberalism has been around, I guess, since the early 1970s, but in the last 10 years, there have been more and more thinkers who've been, and I think partly this might be a result of Michel Foucault's analysis of neoliberalism, talking about how it becomes ingrained in our everyday habits. And the thing that he points to is these ideas about how we become enterprises of our own, of an individual, of a single individual as an enterprise. And I'm wondering, is that related to what you're thinking in terms of the...
So I'm interested in this guy's reading. Foucault's... I'm familiar with Foucault and his idea of the panopticon, but I'm not familiar with his focus on neoliberalism being individualized, whatever that means. Is neoliberalism just another word for capitalism, or what are these people arguing? Because they give no definitions. They assume we're already on their side, or deep in the gospel, or deep in their readings. It seems like a religious reading group that these guys are a part of. Who knows?
A neoliberalization of the left. I mean, make that a little bit more concrete, what you mean by that.
Very good.
Okay, he's about to give his answer. Let's pray that it's decent.
Book come out by Cynthia Aruzzo and Titi Bhattacharya and Nancy Fraser on the feminism for the...
Who are these people?
99%. And one of the things they do is to point out that there's a form of feminism which latched onto neoliberalism precisely because it had this philosophy of entrepreneurialism.
So is he saying that girl bosses are a side effect of neoliberalism? Bro, what is this guy talking about? Why am I watching this video? Okay.
In the self, and so women could say, okay, I'm doing entrepreneurialism myself, and as an entrepreneur I can ascend in the corporate world, and so you get a kind of corporate feminism, which in many ways is represented by Hillary Clinton, which explains why she didn't do so well amongst many women, because that corporate feminism, which is consistent with neoliberalism, has become quite significant in the feminist movement. And so these authors go against that and say we have to have an anti-capitalist feminism, which is anti-neoliberal and anti-capitalist. And I think there's a big difference for me, by the way, between an anti-neoliberal politics and an anti-capitalist project.
Okay, then define neoliberal and define capitalist, and more importantly, define what still exists about these things, like neoliberalism specifically. Because when you're arguing against neoliberalism, you're essentially arguing against capitalism, but you don't give definitions for either of the two.
Project. Because neoliberalism is a particular form of capitalism, and
okay, so neoliberalism is a form of capitalism. Okay, I get it. Nonsense. This is nonsense. This is like This is like people huffing up their own farts or some shit. Like,
The
okay.
question is, can you get rid of it and construct an ethical form of capitalism or a social democratic form of capitalism, or do we really need to go beyond capitalism altogether? But I don't think the left, particularly when you look at some of the other issues and the overlap there is in the left with some aspects of an anarchist tradition, and the anarchist tradition is not entirely sort of opposed to some of the neoliberal ideas about liberty and freedom of the individual and the like. So you'll find
So neoliberalism.
the left these days.
So neoliberalism has more to do with individualism, and individualism is bad, or what? What's so? I don't know what he's arguing. What his political project is. The problem with these professors and things is that they always have a political project instead of trying to teach and do research and advance their profession. Like, politics have so... Our academic class has been so poisoned by politics that they can't simply research things and go where the facts lead them. There's always some sort of political project that they're on, which is the thing I hate the most about like economists, anthropologists, sociologists, any of the humanities. Now, the hard scientists have the same problem, but it's much less so because they actually have to do real research.
Is sort of characterized by what I would call a non-ideological cultural anarchism. And to some degree that is a little bit what comes out of the neoliberal ethic. When the neoliberal ethic was first being proposed, it seemed to me that it was very much being proposed to the generation of '68 and saying to that generation, look, you want individual liberty and freedom. Okay, we'll give it to you, we'll give it to you. We'll give it to you in this neoliberal form, which is a very political economic form, and you have to forget other issues like social justice and the like. So,
what? 68 was... Do you know what the 60s were about? The freaking civil rights movements happened. You know, the fact that social justice is about allowing everyone to participate in the system, giving everyone a fair shot of surviving and thriving in a system that is fair and that relies on voluntary exchange. I don't know what this guy is talking about social justice. Is he talking about like social justice as in like confiscating the rich's assets? Or what is he talking about? Like the 60s were fundamentally about getting people in line, free and able to not be discriminated against for a job, for whatever, for participating in society, for voting, for doing all of these activities. The 60s was a sea change. I mean, I don't agree with everything from the 60s, like, you know, the sexual revolution stuff, the weird aspects about that come from it, like this wokeism stuff that evolved from it. But at the same time, man, this guy is really something.
It's seeped its way into the discourses of much of the left, and I think that this creates a sort of a tolerance for some neoliberal practices, but they're never ideas, which then exist on the left.
Now, returning also to this issue now of the alliance between neoliberalism and conservatism, in a way, I'm wondering if there's a parallel.
The alliance between neoliberalism and conservatism doesn't exist. It's called neoconservatism. Neoconservatism is what happens when you have conservative social policy combined with economic liberalism. So if you can call that neoliberalism alliance between neoliberalism and conservatism, but it's really neoconservatism because they believe in open economics, active intervention in foreign policy, and a focus on capitalist ethics combined with religious conservatism, social conservatism, all of the aspects of what it means to be a conservative and a capitalist.
That might be made in the sense that to something that you wrote actually a long time ago when you wrote about the new imperialism. And what I'm thinking of specifically is about, I think you made the distinction between the logic of capital versus the logic of territory, I think it was the alternative. And
Bro, what is this guy talking about? Like, if this guy is saying that the logic of capitalism is like served by territorialism, or even that the state is serving capital or whatever, or maybe the logics are different but one serves the other, that may be true, but in the case, what's happening now isn't that the state is serving the rich. It's the rich that's serving the state. Because you have this logic of the state having control over its resources, its borders, its people. The US is the only place that taxes its citizens worldwide. It's the only place that exercises a degree of control over its citizens that is comparable to China, but because of its constitution is fundamentally limited in how it can participate and enhance itself. So I don't know what he's going to argue here, but if it's probably going to be some bullshit. It's probably going to be saying that like the interest of the state serves capital or something like that, which is definitely not the case.
This neoliberal alliance with conservatism, it follows kind of a logic of territory in some sense, versus you also have among the elites, or among the ruling class, if you will, of a kind of a logic of capital and a kind of this neoliberal, non-conservative neoliberalism that and that's represented by the big tech companies, for example, Google and Apple and so on, and Facebook on the one hand. And on the other hand, you've got the kind of Trumpian neoliberalism that is authoritarian. And of course now the left forces seem to be stuck somehow in terms of...
This is not insightful at all. Like, I don't know how, like, this must hit deep if you're like, if you've never heard this before, or you've lived under a rock or something, but this, it doesn't take a book to understand this.
Possibly facing the choice between one of those two or presenting an alternative. And I'm just wondering if what that, so to speak, that other logic might be in terms of what would it be oriented towards, and how would it be able to present a real alternative to this logic of capital versus logic of territory, the neoliberal versus the neoliberalism, if you will, and the conservative neoliberalism. How can it can this?
Bro, just say neocon. Why can't you just say neocon?
Alternative kind of get beyond this dichotomy.
Well, I take it from this perspective that when I read Marx, particularly Volume 1 of Capital, what I see is a system which systematically has the rich growing richer and the poor getting relatively poorer. In other words, a free market economy driven by competition in which there's an equalization of the rate of profit. That kind of economy will produce automatically greater and greater levels of social inequality and of social well-being. And of course, the neoliberal era, all the data show that is exactly what has happened. So you kind of go, okay, I understand theoretically.
Okay, this is not unique to neoliberalism. Anytime where you have a prolonged period of peace with a prolonged period of economic growth, you're going to have inequality increase. Because it's just simple logic. Because like in every society, no matter what, inequality has always increased as time has passed. The only times when inequality decreases are when bad things happen, like wars, revolutions, or pandemics, or the Black Death was a big example of inequality decreasing. In fact, inequality increasing is a sign that your society is successful and getting more prosperous. But life gets better for the poor too, because the poor have more services, more technology, more resources. So I don't think this is unique to neoliberalism, or this is caused by the neoliberal ethic. In fact, inequality decreased from the 1900s from the start of 1900 to 1940. That wasn't because of anything miraculous or a good thing in society. It was because we had the Great Depression and World War II, World War I. We had terrible events happen, and that decreased inequality. Only after the war did inequality increase, and it increased gradually at first, more rapidly in towards the end of the 20th century, and we're seeing the fruits of that. So this is not uniquely insightful. I could write a book about this, but there's already so many books that have been written about the peace dividend and the rise in inequality. So, I hope this guy makes sense or something.
Why this is happening is because of this mechanism, because that's what this mechanism does, and then I see the data.
So he's saying neoliberalism does this. This is not true. This is fundamentally false. Like, how do I describe this? He says he sees two things. He sees the ideology around the current day, and then he sees economics. And he's trying to tie those two together as if those are related. Those have nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing. Otherwise, you would see... Never mind. I'm not going to get into that. But
that then, I think, leads to the challenge to the legitimacy of neoliberalism, because the idea behind it is to say to everybody, do entrepreneurial work in yourself, and then you'll become rich and all the rest of it. But it turns out...
The thing is, the rise of inequality isn't that anyone's getting poorer. It's that people are getting vastly richer at a faster rate. There's this rise in a trend of mass affluence, which half of the middle class is now considered mass affluent, where they can afford expensive trucks, like $60,000 trucks. They afford vacations regularly. They can go to the Bahamas or the Maldives or some sort of exotic destination. And they're the mass affluent class. And it wasn't caused by anyone getting poorer. It was caused by people getting richer. And this stratification between the rich and poor is only happening because the poor's life, the middle class's lifestyle isn't changing, but some of the middle class is getting an advanced lifestyle that is getting more improved as time goes on, whereas the lower half of the middle class and the poor are only getting the baseline levels that they are getting from, like, let's say the 80s or something. So this is not particularly new or insightful.
That's extremely difficult to do, and for the mass of the population, it turns out to be impossible. So they look at this situation and say, this system is not working for me, but then the neoliberal ethic kicks in about entrepreneurialism in the South and says, well, if you're poor, it's because you didn't invest in your own cultural capital. It's your fault that you're poor. So neoliberalism has a very clever way of turning things around and blaming the victim. And we saw that in the foreclosures.
The victim of what? Is he talking about 2008? Because 2008 was this... If you want to blame 2008 on anyone, you can blame it on Bill Clinton. Pretty much the idea that everyone should have a house at a low cost was the fundamental reason why we had the government enforcing that banks should loan at whatever rate they can and expand their loans to subprime borrowers. The government was pretty much pushing this on banks, and then they were saying that we'll take care of everything if things go south. We'll guarantee the loans. So if you're blaming 2008 on anyone, blame it on the person who says that everyone should own a house rather than rent, or people should fundamentally have a life have a life that outpaces their ability to pay for it. That is the fault. That is what you should blame 2008 on.
Housing and all this kind of stuff. Many people who were foreclosed upon didn't blame the system. What they blamed was themselves. So actually, what neoliberalism does as an ideology is to start to do that. So when somebody kind of says, look, the system's not working for me, the system turns around and says, well, that's because you didn't work on your education, you didn't do it right, it's your fault, all this kind of stuff. So it's a very neat way. Now, when you get to the mid-1990s, well, beyond that, I would say, sort of around 2000, particularly after the Clinton years, when Clinton came in promising all kinds of benefits and gave us NAFTA and all these neoliberal reforms. And at that point, I think people kind of said, you know, this is not really working for me. And what's more, there's something going on here which is not right. So you start to see in the 2000s this kind of alliance between the neocons and the neoconservatives and the authoritarian state, because the only way in which social order could be actually kept was by actually starting to discipline populations. Because after all, the first revolt against the neoliberal order, which was global as opposed to particular, there are lots in Latin America.
How has Trump disciplined the American people? I know how he's going after foreigners, but he's not going after American citizens. You know, you've heard of cases where American citizens were taken in by ICE or arrested due to non-compliance with federal regulations and laws. But fundamentally, his target isn't American citizens. In fact, what you would have to argue that he's going after disciplining American citizens, is that you'd have to point to something where he's fundamentally targeting American citizens rather than doing what Republicans have been doing for decades, which is trying to repeal Obamacare, which has fundamentally failed, or create a bigger police state than already is the case, which, you know, the police has been militarizing under each administration, right or left. You know, people who go after power are going to go after power and not release it or not use, they're not going to prevent the power from being used. They're going to use it as a cudgel against their enemies.
You know, but the global one was Seattle, which was the anti-globalization movement, and then all of the picketing of the.
Is he talking about Chaz? the what is it called? That autonomous zone within like Seattle or something like that. That wasn't a crackdown. That was just enforcing the law. Like, the Insurrection Act has been in the law since like the 1700s or the 1800s. The Insurrection Act is fundamentally like a law that was passed a long time ago. You think that cracking down on protesters is anything unique to any administration?
IMF and the G20s meetings and all these kinds of things, Genoa, all of that kind of story. And at that point, I think the ruling classes started to say, well, this is going to get out of hand. We need a government structure that's going to sit on these people and do it really, really hard. So when Occupy Wall Street came along, which was a fairly small and fairly innocent kind of movement, actually, Wall Street got...
Bro, this guy is stuck in the pre-2010 world. Like, this guy lives in the world before 2016. I mean, it makes sense. He's an old man. He lives in the past. But he is obviously out of touch with the way things go in modern times. Or he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know, but this guy seemed... it's ridiculous.
And basically summoned the New York mayor at the time, who was a Wall Street character, Bloomberg, to say, squash these people. And so then at this point, the perpetuation of the neoliberal order starts to become more and more...
Perhaps I'm not sympathetic to this video because it was recorded 6 years ago, but man, this guy's saying that the things that apply that were in effect 6 years ago still apply now. It's ridiculous. And this is a waste of time. I'll watch till the end, but there's nothing insightful that's being given here. Just a rehashing of this guy's arguments.
More guaranteed by state authoritarianism and neoconservatism, which now has morphed a little bit into this kind of right-wing populism. So, in a sense, the neoliberal order is being perpetuated by this authoritarian shift. And I think, again, that should give the left a good possibility to mount a counterattack. And I think they are in a position to mount a counterattack in certain parts of the world. But right now, I don't think the left has woken up to this moment of possibility.
All right. Thank you for showing me this video. For the person who requested this. I don't like it, and I disagree heavily with it. I do not believe that it's impactful or insightful or useful at all. So, thank you.